We have a very interesting topic to discuss today, and that is the topic of Jews being impossible. Now, you've got to be careful when you say that Jews are impossible, especially when you hear that coming from a rabbi. I don't mean to say that it's impossible to deal with Jewish people. What I mean to say is that to be Jewish means to live a life that is impossible, meaning not that the Torah has expectations of us that are impossible and we'll never live up to them, but rather the Torah encourages us and empowers us to live a paradox that appears to be impossible. That's actually what we're going to learn about today, is the paradox of Jewish existence, where it seems like what is expected of us is completely paradoxical and maybe even unattainable. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about miracles. You know what they say about Jewish people? We don't believe in miracles, we rely on them. And a big portion of Jewish history is about stories of miracles. So there was the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt. We're drawing close to Pesach, and we're going to celebrate the miracle of the Exodus and the miracles of the 10 plagues and the miracle of the splitting of the sea. Now, that's not just the fact that miracles happened. That is the time in history that the Jewish nation was formed. That tells you something. We were formed in a miraculous fashion. So when people say that we don't believe in miracles, we rely on them, it's not tongue-in-cheek. It's not flippant. We're not trying to just say something to make people feel good or because it's funny. That is our legacy. We came into existence through a series of miracles. Now, I know people are going to say things like, yes, of course, but there are many things in life that are miraculous. For example, people always say, isn't birth just miraculous? No, birth is natural. It is mind-blowing, but it is natural. So that raises the question, what is the distinction between something that is miraculous and something that is natural? Just because something is amazing doesn't make it a miracle, and conversely, not every miracle is necessarily amazing. Now that's an interesting point, right? Because you expect that miracles are jaw-dropping, something earth-shattering. That's what you expect. It's not always the case. And yes, it is a very good point to say the fact that we still exist as Jewish people is a miracle, because really, the odds have not been in our favor. And many people have tried many methods over many times to get rid of us, and we're still here. So that is a miracle. And so it's not surprising then, I suppose, that we live on miracles. We rely on miracles. Yes, the Talmud tells us that you are not allowed to just sit back and not be responsible in your life and expect that miracles are going to happen. We know that. But the concept of the miraculous is so inherent to the Jewish experience. It is so deeply rooted in what it is to be Jewish that it really needs our attention. So once you start to talk about miracles and you start to talk about living a miraculous life, then you automatically are going to ask yourself, so how does it all work? How do you balance the natural and the miraculous? Now, here's what's interesting about being Jewish. This coming Shabbos, we're going to read the paragraph in the Torah that tells us about the unfolding of the Jewish people, which starts with the first mitzvah that we were ever given. Then it goes into the story of how we were supposed to prepare to leave Egypt. Then the story of leaving Egypt and how we commemorate that every year on Pesach. And all together, that is the story of our birth. And it's a story of miracles versus nature. So what's the first mitzvah that the Jewish people were ever given? The first mitzvah that humanity was given is the mitzvah to procreate. Because sustainability of the human race is an obligation on every single human being that exists. It's not unique to the Jewish people. And then the other laws that that the people were given back then are all laws that are required in order to have a sustainable, tenable society. So you've got to have laws of protection of human life. There's got to be a sense of faith. There's got to be a sense of a judicial system, not to take other people's property, etc. That's what you need in order to have a sustainable society. When Jews arrive on the scene, what defines us and what forges us into the Jewish people is not simple sustainability. Something different happens. So what's the very first mitzvah that the Jewish people are given? Not a mitzvah of morality, not a mitzvah of consciousness of God, not a mitzvah about respect for life or property, not a mitzvah about having a sustainable society. What's our first mitzvah? HaChodesh hazeh lochem rosh chodashim. This month will be for you the beginning of all your months. Okay? That's how it's introduced to us. That this will be the beginning of all your months. Okay? That's very nice. So, effectively, the very first mitzvah that we were given is a mitzvah to make a calendar. And that might explain why so much of Judaism is based on time and based on dates. It's a big deal. Now, how does our Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of our month, work? So again, the Torah tells us, HaChodesh hazeh, that this is the beginning of the new month. And based on that, the commentaries tell us, the sages tell us, that Hashem showed Moshe, this is what the moon will look like when it is the beginning of a new month. Our months follow the moon. Our months follow the moon. Okay. So let's pause for 1 second, and let's ask ourselves this question. The concept of a Jewish calendar is very much obviously tied into the concept of leaving Egypt and at that point forming the Jewish people. Let's ask ourselves this question: why? Why that mitzvah? Out of all the mitzvahs that we could have had, the first one of the 10 commandments, I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. Okay, so they weren't yet out of Egypt. He could have said, I am Hashem your God who will take you out of Egypt. It makes sense that belief in God should be the first mitzvah. Why, of all the mitzvahs that God chose to give us, is it the mitzvah of the calendar, and specifically the lunar calendar? Something that we've got to understand. So now let's think a little bit about this calendar. It's a confusing calendar, right? The Jewish calendar is very confusing. That's why you always have, especially a year like this year, which is a leap year, you always have people saying, I don't understand it. Usually I have Yortzeit for my whoever. At this time of the year, it's usually in April. This year it's in March. It's usually in February. People get very confused. People get confused. People often say things like, Pesach is late this year. You know, you don't really hear that in other societies, right? Nobody turns around and says, oh, Thanksgiving is really late this year. You know, or, I don't know, Halloween is much earlier than usual. No, it's on the same date on the calendar every single year. It's exactly where you expect to find it. But lahavdil, our calendar is a moving target. Sometimes it's at this time of the year, sometimes at a later time of the year. So it's very unstable, it would seem. And the reason for that is because we have a lunar calendar. And a lunar calendar means that you establish the beginning of the month based on when you're going to see the new moon. That's how you know it's a new month. And seeing as the new moon follows a cycle that gives us a year that is a bit short, 354 days, so it keeps falling behind the solar calendar. Now, the solar calendar is very stable. 365 days of the year, you know exactly where you stand, you know what to expect. The seasons always work out exactly as they're supposed to be. You don't have to play any major catch-up. Like, in the secular world, they have a 29th of February, and they think something significant has happened. Wow, there's an extra day to this year. Go tell all the women to propose to their boyfriends. You know, that's like a big deal. For us, we're catching up every 2 to 3 years. We're catching up a whole month, as we've done this year. So it's very confusing for people. You know what else is confusing? You think that the Jewish calendar is confusing just because we follow the months? No, get this. We start the months 6 months after we start the year. Now try and get this into the head of any ordinary person, any normal thinking individual. This Shabbos is going to be Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it's the beginning of the first month of the year. So if you had to write a calendar date numerically, this coming Shabbos would be written 1/1/82. That's how we'd write the calendar. That's how we'd write the date. In 6 months from then, we will celebrate Rosh Hashanah, New Year's. On that date, we'll write 1/7/83. What do you mean? How can you possibly start the new year in the 7th month? It just doesn't make any sense, right? So it's highly confusing for people. And effectively, our system works as follows. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the cycle of years. So that's when we'll swap from 5782 to 5783. If you have to date a legal document in Judaism, that's when you'll change the year. If you want to know when the Shemitah ends, that's when the Shemitah year is going to end. But our months, we count our months from Nisan. So you could be in this year and month number 6. And then in the next year, and it's month number 7. Okay, it's strange, right? So you've got to ask yourself the question, why is this? Why is Judaism designed this way? It seems like a very unusual way to set up a system and to set up just literally to set up how you measure time. It just doesn't sound right. Now, the Even Ezra, who is one of the commentators on the Chumash, makes a very interesting observation, and he says the moon does not have a cycle of years. Makes sense, right? What do you mean it doesn't have a cycle of years? How do you work out the length of a month? It's based on the moon's orbit. And seeing as the moon's orbit is 29 and whatever fraction days, so that's considered a cycle of the moon. So the Even Ezra says that the moon has no year cycle, no annual cycle. The sun has no monthly cycle, because the way that we work out the solar year is that it takes 365 years for the orbit of the Earth and Sun. So therefore, 365 years is the full circuit for the sun. There's no such concept as a month for the sun. Isn't that interesting? In other words, we're not just simply saying that there's a lunar calendar and a solar calendar and they have a different amount of days. We're saying they work on different systems. The lunar calendar is a month-based system, and the solar calendar is a year-based system. So, how in Hebrew do we say a month? Chodesh, which comes from the word chadash, because each month the cycle starts afresh. And the truth is that this month's cycle of the moon is not going to be identical to last month's cycle of the moon. So last month, for example, on Purim, you might have gone outside and seen this massive orange moon. It was huge. That does not mean that this month, when we go out on Pesach, that the moon at full moon will be the same size. Because each month, the cycle is chadash. It's a little closer, it's a little further. It's the same, pretty much the same amount of time that the circuit takes, that the orbit takes, but it's not exactly the same. Whereas the solar calendar, that's when you measure Shana, a year. Now, Shana in Hebrew also means to repeat, like a Mishnah. A Mishnah is when you repeat information that have been passed down orally and you now record it in writing. Or like the expression, it's not a positive expression, but the expression that is used where we say, Ovar v'shana, when a person does a sin and then repeats the sin. So what is the nature of the solar cycle? Shana, after 1 year, the identical cycle is going to repeat. Not going to get a bigger sun and a smaller sun. You're not going to get a sun. You know, that's the thing, as the Rambam puts it. He says, the Pasuk tells us in Tehillim, Shemesh yoda mevo'oi. The sun knows its path. So the Rambam writes, Yoreach lo yoda mevo'oi. The moon doesn't know its path. It doesn't keep a set path. It's constantly shifting, and the angles are somewhat different. So you have two systems, not just two systems of how the calendar works. One system is fundamentally based on the idea that there'll always be something new from month to month. So it's the system of surprises, the system of the unexpected. Whereas the annual system is dafka consistency. Shana. Every year is going to repeat what happened on every previous year. So therefore, in the words of the Even Ezra, there is no such thing as a month for the sun, and there's no such thing as a year for the moon. That's the Even Ezra. Now we're going to have a look at a Midrash. The Midrash tells us that when Hashem created his world, in fact, the Midrash uses a very interesting expression. Instead of saying when Hashem created his world, the Midrash says, Keshebochar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When Hashem chose his world, interesting, right? When he chose his world, he established a system of months and of years. And when Hashem chose Yaakov and his children, which is referring, of course, to the Pesach story and the formation of the Jewish people, then Hashem established a month of redemption. Okay? What's the Midrash trying to tell us? The Midrash is telling us, let's think for a second, what is redemption? What is Geula? And it's easy for us to work this out because we go back to the first one. When the Jews left Egypt, that was Geula, that was redemption. What happened? What happened is the rules changed. Because the rules of nature are very clear. The dominant controls the less dominant. Egypt was the world's superpower. The Jews at that time, Bnei Yaakov, the children of Yaakov, were just effectively an extended family who were now the slaves of the Egyptians. So by the laws of nature, there was no way out. They'd been there already for 210 years, and it was going to stay that way. How do they get out? How do you have Geula? How do you have redemption? Hashem breaks the rules. And he does something which is unexpected. And he does something which is a miracle. And what's the miracle? The collapse of Egypt, the superpower that nobody believed could ever be compromised. That superpower collapses. And that's how the Jews get out of Egypt. So what's the Midrash telling us? The Midrash is telling us that when Hashem chose to create the world, how did Hashem choose to create the world? With a natural system and a natural order. And that natural system is represented by the calendar that was started right from the beginning of time, which is the solar calendar. All societies from the beginning of time measured the passage of time by tracking the sun. That's the natural order. Like the Even Ezra said, the sun has no months. The sun has nothing unexpected. The sun has no surprises. It is Shana. It just keeps repeating the same cycle on a loop. That's how Hashem originally created the world. Absolutely natural. Then, when it came time for Hashem to make the Jewish people are not part and parcel of ordinary society. The Jewish people are not bound by the loop of nature. We actually say this in the most famous of all Jewish prayers. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Now, everybody translates that quite glibly. The Lord is our God, which is very nice, and it sounds kind of like the thing that you expect people to say in a religious environment. The Lord is our God. You expect something evangelical about that, But actually what we're saying is Hashem, which is spelled Yud-K, Vav-K, which is the name of God that represents that which is totally transcendent, beyond nature, beyond time and space, beyond the natural order, is Elokeinu. You see, the word Elokim, in addition to meaning God, is also the name of Hashem that represents nature. It is the name that has the gematria value of Hateva, which is the word for nature. It is the name of Hashem that is used in the narrative of how creation happened. Bereshis bara Elokim. But in this case, it is possessive. It is our God. In other words, Hashem, that which is transcendent and beyond nature, Elokeinu is our nature. That's our declaration of faith. It's not just simply a declaration that we believe in God. It's a declaration that we believe that Hashem has chosen and empowered us to live outside of the rules of nature. So that's what the Midrash is telling us. When Hashem chose to make a world, he chose to make a world that behaves according to the laws of nature. And then many years later, almost 2,500 years later, when Hashem decided to choose us as his special nation, then he chose to introduce a concept, the Chodesh Shel Geula, the innovation, the surprise of redemption, the surprise of the capacity to break out of the rules of nature and to transcend the rules of nature and to do things that are not predictable within nature. So if we had to summarize, we've got two systems, and these two systems are completely contradictory. There's the natural system. You could sit in 2022 and using the laws of nature, you could tell exactly when certain natural phenomena will happen in 10, 50, 100, or 1,000 years from now. Because it's Shana. It's a repetitive system. You know how it's going to work. That's one system, the system represented by the solar calendar. Totally independent of that, there's a completely different system that was only introduced to the world at the time of Pesach, and that is the Chodesh system, the months where things change and they don't behave according to nature. So it's nature versus miracles, and I think everybody will agree that nature versus miracles cannot coexist. It's not possible, because a miracle, by definition, means that nature has been suspended. So you turn off nature in order to activate miracles. They cannot coexist. It's the most logical thing in the world. They cannot coexist. Much in the same way as the solar calendar will only represent years and the lunar calendar will only represent months, because they're two different systems. There might be collaboration between the two systems, but they don't really, so to speak, coexist, meaning the moon cannot have an annual cycle and the sun cannot have a monthly cycle. They are mutually exclusive. Right? Does that make sense? Of course it makes sense, until you read this week's parasha, the special parasha that we read, Parashas HaChodesh, because that's where we're introduced to the concept of the moon and Chodesh and the ability to break the rules of nature and to transcend, and the fact that you're not necessarily bound by what nature dictates. So this is the parasha that speaks about HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, the introduction of the concept of that which is going to break the natural system. The natural system is the Shana, that which keeps repeating itself again and again. Oh no, Chadash, now we're going to have something new, something that you didn't see coming. The collapse of the Egyptians, the creation of the Jewish people, the introduction of Torah into the world, and all the other various miracles that happened through the course of history. Wow, we're breaking the rules. What does the Torah continue? Rishoin hu lachem, this will be the first month for you, lechodshei Hashana, for the months of the year. Whoa, stop. Why are we talking about the year? The moon has no annual cycle. The word Shana is misplaced when you're talking about the moon. You should never be able to use the expression Chodshei Hashana, months of the year. Months are one system that are independent of the year. That's why Rosh Hashanah could be in the 7th month. So why on earth would you call it months of the year? Shana seems out of place in that conversation. You know what's equally out of place? Let's go back to the Midrash. The Midrash said, Mishe bochar HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'olamoi. When Hashem chose to create his world, which is the natural order, what did he do? The Midrash tells us, he instituted Chodashim v'Shanim, months and years. What do you mean? Months? That's not how Hashem created the world. He didn't create the world with a capacity for chidush. That's something that comes later, almost 2,500 years later. When he created the world, he created a natural order represented by Shanim, the cyclic annual solar systems. Why would the Midrash talk about the concept of months when you're describing the natural order? So guess what? In both scenarios, we have somehow included a word that doesn't seem to fit. And it's not just about a word, it represents a different system. When you're describing the system of creating nature, this is not the time to describe the word that refers to miracles. And when you introduce the system of miracles, it's not the time to talk about the system of nature, because they're mutually exclusive, right? Right? They are mutually exclusive. Surely, that's exactly how we work. We believe that those two realities cannot coexist. Either it's natural or it's a miracle, and that's where we are wrong. See, one of the biggest problems that we have as people, it's not our fault, it's just the nature of our existence. One of our problems is that because the world that we live in is binary, we consistently project a binary system onto Hashem. What I mean our system is binary? Well, we know that the Torah, when it starts the story of the creation, it starts with the letter Beis, which has the numerical value of 2, to tell us that we live in a binary world, where everything is either or. Up or down, right or left, dark or light, wrong or right. We live in a binary world. And we are unable to accommodate opposites. So it cannot be dark and light simultaneously. It's just not possible in our world. You cannot be up and down simultaneously. It is not possible. So in our world, it is impossible for something to be a miracle and natural simultaneously. It just doesn't make any sense. So we then go and we project that onto Hashem and we say, well, obviously Hashem has one of two systems that he can use interchangeably, but can never use them both together. That's impossible. Whoa, let's not put our limitations on God. Let's ask ourselves a question which will help us to understand how all of this is going to make sense. Let's ask ourselves a very interesting question. Why miracles? Why does Hashem do miracles? Think about it. And in fact, you don't even have to think about it, because all the time people say something along the lines of, if God would only do a miracle, I would be much more observant. Because that's what we believe. We believe that if water started to flow upstream, or if Hashem would send locusts to Russia, or if, I don't know, the earth would open up and swallow up the leaders of Hezbollah or Hamas or something, then I would believe in God. In other words, we accept as a fundamental principle that miracles are Hashem's way of illustrating to us that he not only exists, but he's absolutely in control. I can't control nature. He can. I can't change the course of nature. He can. So what is the purpose of a miracle? In most people's minds, that's where Hashem pulls back the curtain and shows us that he exists. That's why we love miracles. That's why we want miracles. That's why we celebrate miracles. That's why most people imagine that miracles equal faith. Now, that's definitely not a guarantee. The unfortunate reality is even people who do experience miracles in their lives, they're very inspired at the time. It's not a guarantee that they will necessarily change their lifestyle in a meaningful way because they've experienced a miracle. That's the nature of human beings. But everybody will acknowledge that the purpose of a miracle is to help us be clear about Hashem's supremacy. Now, what's the purpose of nature? Careful with this one, right? Because many of us will say the purpose of nature is to conceal Hashem. Because there are so many atheistic scientists who will tell you it's rules of nature. I don't have to believe in a supreme being, in a higher power. They are predictable, measurable rules of nature. Zehu, that's it. That's the whole extent of existence. That's the whole extent of life. But a Jewish person is taught to look at nature totally differently. So early on when I said that people will make the statement, birth is a miracle, it's not accurate, but the sentiment is right. Birth is not a miracle, in spite of the fact that it is so impressive and there are so many factors that have to align exactly right for there to be a healthy birth. But it is a natural process. Why do people say that birth is a miracle? Because birth does for them the same thing psychologically that a miracle would do. It reminds them that Hashem is in control. Because when you consider all the variables, how many things, God forbid, could have caused an early termination of pregnancy, God forbid, or some kind of unhealthy pregnancy, the fact that it came out healthy, that reminds me that Hashem controls the world. So isn't this interesting? Miracles and nature are both intended to help us recognize God's supremacy. Miracles are a shortcut. Nature requires focus. So you might go out and spend some time in nature, on a mountain, in a forest, at a lakeside, on the beach, and you might have a very meditative experience because you find it to be very serene, and that doesn't have anything to do with Hashem. Or you can go into that same environment and say, wow, raise your eyes on high and recognize who created all of these things. Look at the beauty of nature, the complexity of nature, and recognize Hashem. So the miracle is a shortcut to the same process that nature is supposed to bring us to. So there's a common theme. Nature and miracles are both intended to create awareness of Hashem's supremacy. But there's a difference, though. Because when a miracle happens, it helps us to recognize that how powerful is Hashem? Powerful enough to override nature. Whereas when we contemplate nature, we contemplate Hashem is so great that he controls nature. So even though they both bring us to an awareness of Hashem, they're not exactly the same. Nature brings us to an awareness of Hashem as the creator. Miracles generate an awareness of Hashem being able to break the reality of creation. So let's try something else. You know what else is interesting about nature? Miracles are like chodesh, chodosh, chidush, something new, something unexpected. The sun stops for Joshua. Wow, nobody saw that coming. The prophet Eliyahu cries out to Hashem and a fireball comes out of heaven and ignites the Mizbeach. Nobody saw that coming. So a miracle is a chidush. It's unexpected. What's the reality of nature? Dafka, the fact that it is consistent. And here is a meditation about nature that most people don't begin to consider. Why is nature so reliable? Why is nature so consistent? Let's think about this for a second. When something perpetuates, ongoing, without any sign of stopping, what phrase would we use to refer to something that keeps going and keeps going and keeps going and doesn't stop? You know what we call that in the language of Torah, specifically Jewish mysticism? We call it Ein Sof. It has no end. It doesn't stop. So yes, of course, certain species don't survive. Certain members of certain species live for only a short period of time. But the fact that the species perpetuates again and again and again and again it's an infinite loop. The fact that the sun rises and sets again and again and again is an infinite loop. The fact that it's absolutely predictable that if you mix this chemical compound, you will have that particular reaction time and again, not 99% of the time, 100% of the time, is Ein Sof. So the meditation I'm supposed to have when I look at nature is not the meditation of there is a God who creates the world, and then there's a God who is beyond creation, who is greater than creation and can smash his own rules and cause miracles. Actually, when I look at the world, every facet of the world tells me that Hashem is Ein Sof, without limitation. He has no limitation of the rules of nature, that's why he can do miracles. And he also has no limitation of something that eventually runs out of steam, because the cycles of nature keep repeating again and again and again and again. In other words, there is an absolute synthesis between the month and the year, the lunar and the solar calendar, the miraculous, and the nature. The synthesis is that they both together create my perspective and give me insight to the fact that Hashem has no limits. When a big miracle happens, chidush, something new happened in the world, I know that Hashem is not limited by the rules of the world. I also know the miracle will be short-lived. So I learn in that experience about how Hashem is beyond the rules of nature. And then when nature settles back into its routine, I learn that Hashem, the power that makes nature run, has no limits, because even after the miracle, nature goes back into its predictable, never-ending cycles, because it doesn't have the limitation a miracle has of being short-term. So Chodesh and Shana are a synthesized system. They work together. Just like we catch up the lunar calendar every 2 to 3 years to the solar calendar, in the same way they actually work in a system that is not paradoxical but complementary. The Chodesh teaches me how Hashem can step beyond nature, and the Shana teaches me that Hashem's infinite nature plays out in the natural order. Therefore, what does the pasuk tell us? Rishon hu lochem lechodshei hashana. That this month of Nisan is the beginning of the months of the year. Because the months and the year are not at loggerheads, they both express the same truth. And likewise, the Midrash says, Mishebochar HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'olamoi. When Hashem chose his world, what kind of a world did he choose? A world with Shanim and Chadoshim. A world with a natural order of years and a supernatural order of months, because both of those express Hashem's truth. To put it slightly differently, when you talk about Hashem's essence, which is truly infinite, anything that is truly, well, not anything, only Hashem can be truly infinite. If Hashem is truly infinite, that must mean that Hashem is as much within the natural order as he is beyond the natural order. We get impressed by miracles, so we believe that Hashem is more present in a miracle. That is our short-sightedness. We find it difficult to see Hashem in the natural order. Therefore, we're impressed by the supernatural. But Hashem is beyond rules, beyond boundaries. Therefore, he is as much within the natural order as he is in the supernatural order. To put it into the language of one of the great Kabbalists, the Sefer HaAkedah, Keshem sheyesh lo koyach bebilti bal gvul, just as much as Hashem has power in the infinite realm, kach yesh lo koyach bigvul, he has equal power in the finite realm. What does it mean to live as a Jewish person? Not to say, as I said in the beginning, we don't believe in miracles, we rely on them. That's not what it means to be a Jewish person. What it means to be a Jewish person is to see God absolutely, whether there be miracles or not. That's why one of the greatest miracles that we ever talk about, the miracle that is alluded to by King David's phrase, Le'oiseni flo'ois gedoylois levadoi, that Hashem does great wonders alone. Alone means that only he knows that there was a miracle. As the Gemara calls it, Ein bal haneis makir benisoi. The person who had the miracle doesn't know that a miracle occurred. What is the greatest kind of miracle? The miracle that doesn't look like a miracle. We've just come from Purim. Purim is that kind of miracle. That's why Purim is the greatest simcha of all the holidays on the calendar, because it's a time where the miracle fuses completely with the natural order and there is no contradiction. I can see that harmony. Oh, now I'm really seeing what Hashem is. It's a miracle, but the queen happened to be Jewish. It's a miracle, but Mordechai happened to save the king's life. It's a miracle, but Haman already got the king's backup when he had Vashti killed. When the miracle synthesizes with the natural, oh, that's what it is to be Jewish. That which is beyond lives within. That which is infinite collaborates with the finite. That's why the miracle of Chanukah which was clearly miraculous, oil that burns for 7 extra days, that's absolutely miraculous. A small group of yeshiva bochrim who are able to oust the most powerful military in the world, that is for sure a miracle. We say a bracha for that when we light our Chanukah candles. That Hashem did miracles for our forefathers back then, as He should please God do for us now. And when it comes to Purim, which is a miracle that was completely hidden, as the name Esther represents, it was completely hidden within the annals of ordinary life. What bracha do we say over the Megillah? The same blessing as at Chanukah. Why? To illustrate whether the miracle be noticeable or unnoticeable, they are equal in their mission and their message. What's the message? In Hashem's reality, which is truth with a capital T, there is no difference between a miracle and nature. Both equally represent Hashem in this world. Therefore, to be Jewish is not to look for the miracles, but to find the miraculous within nature. Now that might sound a little abstract. It translates directly into how we're supposed to behave as Jewish people, because a miracle is something unexpected, beyond the natural, and the natural is the routine that consistently repeats itself. Now, in the way that we serve Hashem, we have room for both of those approaches. We all have our routines. The things that we do on a regular basis, the mitzvahs that we do, the Torah learning that we do, that's the part of our Jewish experience that resonates with us, that sits comfortably with us. That's the part of our Judaism that we enjoy. We enjoy the parts that we understand, we enjoy the parts that we're used to doing. And that's where we create our natural space within our Judaism. And it's really important to have that natural space. At the same time, we have to be sure that our natural space within our Judaism does not become complacency. So how do we ensure that? So at the same time that we've got that part of our Judaism that just ticks over, predictably, we have what is called B'chol Ma'oidecha. You're supposed to love Hashem b'chol levavcha, with all your heart. That could become part of how you roll, how you behave. You love Hashem with your whole heart. B'chol nafshecha, with your whole soul. Which could even mean that if, God forbid, there's a need to relinquish your life, you'll do it. B'chol ma'oidecha is where you push yourself beyond yourself. Ma'oid shelcha, anything that for you would be considered beyond your nature. It's what we very loosely call Mesiras Nefesh, the capacity to push yourself. Mesiras Nefesh is not just to die for your Judaism. Mesiras Nefesh is to live for your Judaism in a way that you hadn't expected. How do we harmonize the two realities of the miracle and the natural in our own lives? By having a Judaism that is consistent, and at the same time a Judaism that allows us to push ourselves further than we thought we could go. That allows us, or that encourages us, to do things in our Judaism that we never believed ourselves able to do. That's what it means to be Jewish. Rishon hu lochem lechotshei hashana. The first mitzvah the Jewish nation was ever given was not just a mitzvah that is only about miracles and only about breaking the mold, but it was about fusing that push to break our own mold into our normal day-to-day existence. In other words, not just to rush off and do something that is radical and then settle back into our old processes, but to have every one of our dramatic growth points in Judaism translate into a consistent follow-through. Very, very often we have great inspiration and then we're not quite sure what to do with it. So the challenge is Chodshei Hashana. So take that which is surprising, unexpected, brilliant, mind-blowing, and translate it into Hashana. What will I do to settle that into my routine? So that going forward, I'm a completely different kind of Jew to who I was before that great catalyst occurred. So in Mitzvah Hashem, we should all succeed in being able to do this and to be able to experience the infinite potential of our Judaism on a consistent basis. And please God, through that, we should go to Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption, in the most practical sense, with the coming of Mashiach now.